Hello and welcome to this Wikipedia Clickhole, where we start with a random or suggested article and click our way down the rabbit hole of useless but interesting knowledge. Today we begin in a historic hotel in Wales, which is very obsessed with its high ratings. We'll then explore the town it's in, Abergavenny, and its history as a strategic Roman fort. But Abergavenny is home to more than just Roman history, it's also home to a quintessentially creepy psychiatric hospital, and a circus strongwoman called Vulcana in the 1800s with some amazing heroic acts to her name, one of which leads us to the gripping mystery of a gruesome crime committed by Dr. Crippen, one of the first people to be convicted using wireless technology, just like John Tawell, who we'll look at too. But we'll end on another criminal, a woman who went from theft and exile in her teens to the back of the Australian $20 bill in a rags to riches story you won't want to miss. Hello ladies and pretzel sticks. I actually recorded this clickhole earlier, even feeling that it was one of the most interesting, only to find absolutely zero audio had been recorded. Rather than cross my fingers and hope to fool you with a subpar reenactment, in this episode I will simply recall how this went. So let's start, for the second time, with what was a random article, but obviously in this case, it's already been predetermined. And that random article I clicked on was the Angel Hotel in Abergavenny. The Angel Hotel is a AA 4-star grade 2 listed hotel and inn at 15 Cross Street in Abergavenny, Wales. Whatever the hell AA 4-star grade 2 means. I mean, okay, 4-star I've heard of before, but don't know what AA means. And grade 2, yep, no clue. Clearly very proud of it, but no idea what it means. And here's a picture of the hotel. Doesn't actually really look like anything. It's just sort of a grey building. Looks like it could be a, I don't know, city municipal building really. But apparently it is very fancy. During the Georgian period, it served as a coaching inn, which is basically was a vital part of Europe's inland transport infrastructure until the development of the railway, and it provided a resting point for people and horses. I honestly think we should bring back the coaching inn. I think, especially after this last year, everybody's in need of a little excitement and adventure. So I say revive the coaching inn. They renovated the hotel in 1839. The year is notable because later in it, the landlord was found guilty under the Mutiny Act of 1703 for failing to provide sufficient straw for 2 horses of the 12th Royal Lancers, which was a cavalry regiment of the British Army, who were staying at the hotel. I do wonder how they judged the straw amount to be insufficient. I wonder what the evidence was, because he was found guilty, so it must have been convincing. But the hotel went through its biggest renovation in the early 80s, and most of the furnishings now date to then. And important to note that the deluxe rooms of the hotel are fitted with designer bathrooms. So if your usual toilet, sink and shower don't cut it for you, and you need more luxury touching your fine, precious cheeks, there's an option for that. Also notably, as of 2016, it was one of only 9 hotels outside London to be a part of the UK Tea Guild. Very prestigious indeed, and host to afternoon tea. I didn't realise that there was an official afternoon tea, but, you know, British people. What do you expect? There's an entire section on awards. The hotel is a AA 4-star hotel with a restaurant that has been awarded a AA Rosette. Very luxurious. A reviewer in the Daily Telegraph noted the calm, stylish upstairs bedrooms with cream walls, snow-white beds dressed in pretty cashmere throws, quality brown furniture, and smart bathrooms, as opposed to your run-of-the-mill stupid bathroom that had to redo a year. I do love the phrase quality brown furniture. That is what I strive to acquire in my life. Quality brown furniture. We're going to check out Abergavenny now, which is the town that this hotel sits in Wales. It's got a very charming photo of like an old church and a little sort of market road. Very cozy looking. Abergavenny means mouth of the River Gavenny, and it's both a market town and a community in Monmouthshire, Wales. It's promoted as a gateway to Wales, as it's only 6 miles from the border with England. It's in a strategic location and was originally the site of a Roman fort called Gobanium, and it became a medieval walled town within the Welsh Marches, which is the imprecisely defined area along the border between England and Wales. The town contains the remains of a medieval stone castle built soon after the Norman conquest, but it's also almost entirely surrounded by mountains and hills, which have classic Welsh names that I cannot pronounce. There are the easy to pronounce ones like Blorenge and Sugarloaf, and then there's words that have no vowels. Isgrid Pen-y-Fal and Isgrid. Yeah, I'm not even going to try. The town's name comes from the word Gobania, which kind of sounds like the Roman fort name, Gobanium, which meant River of the Blacksmiths, which relates to the town's pre-Roman importance in iron smelting. And Gobanium was important not only for its strategic location, but it guarded the road along the valley of the river Usk, which linked a bunch of other fortresses, and it was largely built to keep the peace among the local British Iron Age tribe, the Silures, who were a powerful and warlike tribal confederation of ancient Britain. I feel like we're conditioned to think that Europe has been industrialized for so long, but it really wasn't that long ago that it was still kind of tribal. I would actually be interested to learn more about the tribes across Europe in this period. Anyway, Abergavenny, they didn't discover that it was built on top of this Roman fort until the 1960s, when they were excavating the foundations for a new post office and a telephone exchange building. My favourite story on this page is from the 15th century in 1404. We're going to call this guy Owen. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It does look actually like Owen, but I can't pronounce his last name, so Owen it is. And Owen attacked Abergavenny in 1404, and according to popular legend, his raiders gained access to the walled town with the aid of a local woman who sympathised with the rebellion, letting a small party in via the Market Street gate at midnight. They were able to open the gate and allow a much larger party who set fire to the town and plundered its churches and homes, leaving the castle intact though. And ever since, Market Street has been referred to Traitor's Lane, so that's kind of cool. And then in 1404, Abergavenny was declared its own nation by the illegitimate son of Owen, but that arrangement lasted only 2 weeks, so I hope they enjoyed it while it lasted. There's an interesting World War II connection as well. Hitler's deputy Rudolf Hess was incarcerated at the hospital in Abergavenny during World War II. Of all places, it's this tiny Welsh market town, and it has a lot of markets, that's for sure. They've got a lot of festivals every year. Markets are held all the time, mostly food, but they've also had a rock choir, Shire horses are there, motorcycling stunts, vintage cars and steam engines. There's also a country and western music festival, of all things to find in the Welsh countryside. They're really into it, who knew? They've got a writing festival, loads of things. They're clearly big on culture and goods, and always have been. They even had a cattle market, held there from 1863 to 2013. It's got quite a lot of buildings of note, mostly the castle and some historic churches, but it's also home to the Monmouthshire lunatic asylum, later called the Pen-y-Fal Hospital, which stood on the outskirts of Abergavenny. And between 1851 and 1950, over 3,000 people died there. And now there is a memorial plaque for them at the site. And after its closure in the 90s, its building and grounds were redeveloped as a luxury housing development, comprising houses as well as apartments. Can't say I would want to live there, but you know, each to his own. It's mentioned a lot in popular culture, which I didn't know, but Lord Abergavenny is a character in William Shakespeare's play, Henry VIII. It's also in Sherlock Holmes' story, The Adventure of the Priory School. He works on a case in Abergavenny. And also, most notably, in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Abergavenny is mentioned by Stan Shunpike, the conductor of the night bus when the bus takes a detour there to drop off a passenger. I, as a Potterhead, do not remember this reference, but I will certainly note it next time I go back for a reread. Now, I really wanted to check out the psychiatric hospital. God knows I love a creepy abandoned building. But also I wanted to check out Vulcana, a world-famous strongwoman who was born in Abergavenny. So what I did was I went to the hospital first and then returned back to Abergavenny to click on Vulcana. Bit of a cheat in a clickhole, but hell, I make the rules. I say what counts. Here's the hospital. I don't know if you've ever played the video game Outlast, but that's what it looks like. I mean, it really is just your stereotypical House of Horrors, lunatic asylum, you know, red brick gothic facade, sort of 3 stories but really wide, with the big lawn in the front and the street and these classic street lights. Just, oh, it's just so eerie looking. And the fact that 3,000 people died here and now it's a bunch of apartments. Oof. Anyway, Pen-y-Fal Hospital was a psychiatric hospital in Abergavenny, Monmouthshire. The main building is Grade 2 listed, just like the Angel Hotel. I have no idea what they're for, but they love their grades. Was appointed as the Joint Counties Lunatic Asylum in 1851, originally having 210 inmates in 12 wards on 75 acres of landscaping. And I'm sure they needed all 75 acres of landscaping to keep people out of it and not see what they were doing to these people inside. At its peak, at the end of the 19th century, it had just over 1,000 patients, and the hospital went into a period of decline in the later 20th century until it finally closed in 1997, and has been converted into luxury accommodation since, which I find really questionable. I hope they follow up with the people who live there to find out if strange things happen to them. That is some paranormal activity I would be interested in learning about. Remarkably, that's all there is on the Pen-y-Fal Hospital. I was really hoping for, some creepy stories, but it just didn't come to fruition. So just as well we can go back to Abergavenny and click on our amazing strongwoman, Vulcana. And I absolutely love the picture of Vulcana. I mean, she has the tiniest waist, obviously cinched to bits in some probable corset. She doesn't particularly look like a strong woman. She's got a very average build by today's standards. Her arms look fit, maybe like she works in a bakery, needs a lot of bread, but she doesn't look like a strong woman, like we have today, where they're just gigantic and can lift 1,000 pounds. Anyway, she's very imposing on her strange brick set she's had her photo taken on. But her real name was Miriam Kate Williams, better known by her stage name Vulcana, a Welsh strongwoman born of Irish parents in Abergavenny. With strongman William Hedley Roberts, better known as Atlas, she toured music halls in Britain, Europe, and Australia, and the couple performed as the Atlas and Vulcana group of society athletes. She lived quite a long life, not bad, 1874 to 1946. She only retired in 1932. I mean, she just kept going. So, Miss Kate Williams was born to a popular local preacher, and she worked at a tannery, which kind of explained that she did some early strength work tanning hides. She met William Roberts at the local women's gymnasium that he ran in 1890 when she was 15, which apparently was a totally appropriate age for them to fall in love, despite Roberts already having a wife and family, and so they left town together and never parted for the rest of their lives. That is a very unlikely and unhealthy start to a relationship. I mean, she's 15, man. It's just gross, but apparently it worked out. Her first appearance was as a replacement act at a party hosted by William Roberts in the wonderfully named Pontypool, Wales. Pontypool is such a great town name. They began to be billed together as Atlas and Vulcana from the time of their first appearances in London in 1892. Atlas greatly exaggerated his own and Vulcana's lifting capacities, as most of his published boasts have been dismissed. That is a disappointment. It says that he was challenged to his face on several occasions, and was proved to be using weights lighter than he claimed. Big whoops. And so Vulcana's reputation suffered alongside his, but her authenticated accomplishments were genuinely remarkable for a woman of her era. Oh, check out this picture of her flexing on the cover of a magazine. That is a solid bicep for a woman in the 1800s. That is very impressive. She reached the height of her popularity in France, and she was honoured with over 100 medals throughout her career. Her best authenticated feats were bent press, which is seemingly like an overhead shoulder press, one-armed shoulder press, which she was recorded as completing with her right hand with at least 124.5 pounds or 56.5 kilos. That is a lot. I mean, she's lifting a small woman. That is crazy strong. I want to just look this up because I'm thinking of like a normal shoulder press. Oh, this way. It's one of these. So you're sort of bent over and to the side. It's a really awkward position. Apparently you're capable of lifting a lot of weight this way. She even freed a wagon stuck in Maiden Lane in Covent Garden in London in 1901 by lifting it before astonished witnesses. In 1913, she lifted a challenge bell that her rival strongwoman Ethelda failed to raise after 25 minutes of trying. Honestly, props to Ethelda for taking 25 minutes to trying to lift anything. You're only getting progressively more tired. I'm surprised she gave it that long, but Vulcana had no trouble. So there were a lot of tall tales about Vulcana and her feats of strength, but some of the stories about her are actually based on genuine incidents of heroism, which are authenticated. At the age of 13, she stopped a runaway horse in Bristol. In 1901, she rescued 2 children from drowning in the River Usk, for which she received an award. In 1910, she was first to alert the police of the disappearance of her friend Cora Crippen, ultimately leading to the investigation prosecution and execution of her husband, Dr. Hawley Crippen. And in 1921, the Garrick Theatre caught fire on an evening of the Society Athletes performance, and she risked her life to save another act's horses. She came away with serious burns on her head. Reportedly in 1902, she knocked out a pickpocket who attempted to steal her purse, which I fully believe. Vulcana and Atlas moved permanently to London in the 1920s and retired in 1932. But in 1939, she was hit by a car in London, and she was conscious when she heard her own death pronounced. What a moment to witness. She did suffer brain damage, but she partially recovered. So this is interesting. Vulcana and Atlas performed as a brother and sister, but they had 6 children together, and they never married, which is really interesting for the time especially. But there was never any scandal about it because nobody ever knew while they were alive. I don't know how they kept that secret, to be honest. How do you hide the fact that you've 6 kids together, especially since Vulcana did not want her children left with relatives or in orphanages and insisted on raising them herself? And then when her kids were old enough, they all performed in the Society Athletes as well. I mean, how do you keep that a secret from society? Nobody sees you with your 6 kids. Nobody sees Vulcana and Atlas sneaking a smooch after a show? Really? Not at all? Remarkable. There is a women's circus in Australia named after her, and that's part of her legacy. So there you have it, the heroics of Vulcana. From here, I was most perturbed by the disappearance of her friend Cora, and Cora's husband, Dr. Crippen, was accused. He is one creepy looking motherfucker. That is not a face I trust. He looks like a rodent. Okay, Hawley Harvey Crippen, usually known as Dr. Crippen, was an American homeopath, ear and eye specialist, and medicine dispenser. He was hanged in Pentonville Prison in London for the murder of his wife, Cora Henrietta Crippen, and was the first suspect to be captured with the aid of wireless telegraphy. However, also see the article on John Tawell, which we'll check next, who was the first person to be arrested as a result of telecommunications technology. And actually, I'm glad I'm going over this twice because I don't really know what the difference is, why they're both the first to be captured. So, Crippen was born in Michigan. He became a homeopathic medical doctor as a result of his education. His first wife, Charlotte, supposedly died of a stroke. Not sure if we believe that, given how his story turns out. Having qualified as a homeopath, Crippen practiced in New York, where he married his second wife, Corinne Cora Turner. She was a music hall singer, but in 1897 they moved to England together, and although his US medical qualifications were not sufficient for him to practice as a doctor in the UK, he continued working as a distributor of patent medicines, and Cora socialized with a number of variety players of the time, presumably where she met Vulcana. Crippen ended up getting fired from his job 2 years later for spending too much time managing his wife's stage career, so he became a manager of an institution for the deaf where he hired Ethel Leneve, a young typist, in 1900. And by 1905 the two were having an affair. Here we get to the meaty crime. After a party at their home in 1910, Cora disappeared. Crippen claimed that she had returned to the US, and later added that she had died and been cremated in California. Meanwhile, his lover, Ethel, moved into the house and began openly wearing Cora's clothes and jewelry. I can't imagine wearing my partner's dead spouse's clothing and jewelry, even if murder wasn't in the picture. So Ethel is morally ambiguous to me at this point. I have questions over how she was okay to do that, but I guess she was morally questionable from the beginning. So police first heard of Cora's disappearance from her friend, Vulcana, but they didn't really take the matter seriously until they were asked to investigate by a personal friend of the Scotland Yard superintendent, and they searched the house but nothing was found, and the chief inspector, Walter Dew, interviewed Crippen, and Crippen admitted to fabricating the story about his wife having died, but he explained it as that he'd made it up in order to avoid any personal embarrassment because he said she left him and went to America with one of her lovers, and this story satisfied Dew, the chief inspector. But Crippen and Ethel didn't know that he was satisfied with the story, and so they fled in panic to Brussels, where they spent the night at a hotel before boarding a cruise liner for Canada, the SS Montrose. Their sudden disappearance was a big red flag, and the police at Scotland Yard decided to perform another 3 searches of the house, and during the 4th and final search, that's when they found the torso of a human body buried under the brick floor of a basement. They found traces of the the drug scopolamine, which is used to treat motion sickness, which is typically used to cure motion sickness, in the torso parts. The corpse was identified by a piece of skin from its abdomen, but the head, limbs, and skeleton were never recovered. Now, here's the exciting part, the transatlantic arrest. Crippen and Ethel were crossing the Atlantic on the Montrose, escaping to Canada, with Ethel disguised as a boy. The captain, Henry George Kendall, recognized them though, and just before steaming past the range of his on-ship transmitter, he had the telegraphist send a wireless telegram to the British authorities, and that read, "Have strong suspicions that Crippen London cellar murderer and accomplice are among saloon passengers. Moustache taken off, growing beard. Accomplice dressed as a boy. Manner and build, undoubtedly a girl." The funny part is, if Crippen had travelled in third class instead, he probably would have escaped Kendall's notice, but no, he had to be Mr. Fancy Pants, and he got caught. So, at the receipt of this message, Dew, the chief inspector, boarded an even faster cruise liner from Liverpool, arriving in Quebec ahead of Crippen, and contacted the Canadian authorities. Now, this was also a massive twist in fate, because Canada was still within the British Empire. So, if Crippen, who was an American citizen, had sailed to the US instead, even if he'd been recognized, they would have had to take extradition proceedings in order to bring him to trial. But because they went to Canada and it was still within the British Empire, it was a little easier for law enforcement to do their job. So Dew came aboard the Montrose, disguised as a pilot, and Kendall, the captain, invited Crippen to meet the pilots as they came aboard. And Dew removed his pilot's cap and said, "Good morning, Dr. Crippen. Do you know me? I'm Chief Inspector Dew from Scotland Yard." And after a pause, Crippen replied, "Thank God it's over. The suspense has been too great. I couldn't stand it any longer," and held out his wrists for the handcuffs. And so Crippen and Ethel were arrested on board the Montrose, and Crippen was returned to England. The trial lasted 4 days. The Wikipedia article has all the details and arguments laid out, and there's lots of drama. There's even a picture of the alleged scar tissue used in evidence at trial, because there was a scar on the torso they found beneath the basement that was consistent with Cora's medical history. Anyway, the jury had 27 minutes of deliberation before they found him guilty of murder, but Ethel was charged only with being an accessory after the fact and was acquitted. And technically, Crippen never gave any reason for killing his wife. Some theories were that he was using the motion sickness drug as a depressant, but accidentally gave her an overdose and panicked when she died. Somebody else said that he killed her because supposedly she had syphilis, but let's face it, you know, it's probably because he wanted to run away with Ethel and not have to worry about Cora cheating on him as well. Apparently some of his relatives in Michigan have begun lobbying for his remains to be repatriated. I don't know that that's a relative I'd want to bring home. He did a bad, and I would not be paying to have him brought home, that's for sure. There is some doubt over Crippen being convicted, because it's weird that he so successfully disposed of the head and limbs and skeleton, but not the torso, which is weird, but I mean, they always say every murderer makes a mistake. And there was even some new scientific evidence at Michigan State University where they claimed that the mitochondrial DNA in the torso actually belonged to a man, not even a woman. But there's a lot of doubt cast on that because they were using some new special technique and they're working with century-old evidence, so it's a less than optimal sample to work with. So let's look at the other person who's debatably the first person to be arrested as a result of telecommunications technology. That's John Tawell, who's a British murderer. He was transported to Australia for the crime of forgery in the days where the UK would relocate all its criminals to Australia. So he went to Sydney and flourished and left it a rich man. Returned to England, married a woman as his second wife, and then was convicted of the murder of his own mistress by using prussic acid, which is hydrogen cyanide, because he was afraid that their relationship would become known. What happened is a man in distinctive Quaker dark clothing had been observed to leave Sarah, the mistress's house, shortly before she died, and police found that a person answering his description had caught the train at Slough, heading for London. So the police used a newly installed telegraph to send a message to Paddington giving the particulars and asked for his capture. And thus the man was captured. So that is how that ended up being the first man arrested as a result of telecommunications technology. That exact telegraph transmitter and receiver that was used to apprehend him are preserved in the Science Museum in London. Then we decided to look at the list of convicts transported to Australia. And boy, is it a big list. Penal transportation there began in 1788 and ended in 1868, during the course of which approximately 165,000 convicts were transported to Australia. And the funny thing is it's mostly like theft and forgery and crimes that you would think wouldn't merit exile, but they just shipped them all out. You did anything, you got shipped out. I really like not only Margaret Catchpole's name, but she has a very glamorous portrait, which I was curious about and I almost clicked on, but I continued on to down here, and it was this remarkable portrait of Mary Reibey. I mean, she looks like the cutest little old grandma. She's got a little lace bonnet on and her little glasses are pushed to the end of her nose and little pastel colours, and she looks so peaceful and calm, and I thought, what the hell was she arrested for? Turns out it's horse theft. She was arrested for horse theft, and I needed to know more about this cute old grandma living out the GTA lifestyle. So, she was transported to Australia, but after gaining her freedom, she was viewed by her contemporaries as a community role model and became legendary as a successful businesswoman in the colony. After the death of her parents, she was taken care of by her grandmother, and she ran away and was arrested for stealing a horse in 1791, at the age of 14, and she was disguised as a boy going under the name of James Burrow, and so they sent her to Australia. 3 years later, she was 17 and got married, as you do, to Thomas Reibey, and he was a junior officer on a store ship. He was granted land on a river where he and Mary lived and farmed following their marriage, and they built a farmhouse which is now listed on the Register of the National Estate. He started a cargo business along that river to Sydney, and later moved to Sydney, and his business undertakings prospered, enabling him in 1804 to build a substantial stone residence on a further grant of land. And then he acquired several farms and traded in coal, cedar, furs and skins, and entered into a partnership which extended his trading activities into the Bass Strait, the Pacific Islands, and from 1809 to China and India. And then he died in 1811, and it was Mary who assumed sole responsibility for the care not only of her 7 children, but also the control of all the business enterprises. But she was no stranger to this task, having managed her husband's affairs during his frequent absences from Sydney, so she was now a woman of considerable wealth. And not only did she take on the businesses, but she continued to expand them. A year after his death, she even opened a new warehouse, and a few years after that extended shipping operations by buying even more vessels, and then founded the Bank of New South Wales in her house. By 1828, she gradually retired from active involvement in commerce, but she had acquired extensive property holdings in the city, and she gained respect for her charitable works and her interest in the church and education. But in retirement, she built yet another house in Newtown, Sydney, where she lived until her death. An enterprising and determined person of strong personality, during her lifetime, Reibey earned a reputation as an astute and successful businesswoman in the colony of New South Wales. She is featured on the opposite side of Australian $20 notes, and even her oldest son became the Premier of Tasmania. There are at least 3 novels that have been written about her life. I mean, that is the ultimate rags to riches story though. You're an orphan, you are 14, you are shipped to a strange continent. Can you imagine being 14, no parents, stealing a horse, and then being shipped to a continent unfathomably far away, and then having to make a life for yourself, and you end up being this business mogul and owning loads of property and having a bank founded in your house, and then doing a ton of charity work and everything? Mary Reibey. Way to make lemonade out of lemons. And on that note, I hereby end this Clickhole. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment below with what you found most interesting here. Feel free to leave a suggestion for next time, and thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Testing this motherfucker because I don't trust it.